Chapter 6. Now came the time for our big mountain climb. Jaffe came over in late afternoon on his bike to get me. We took out Alva's knapsack and put it in his bike basket. I took out socks and sweaters, but I had no climbing shoes, and the only things that could serve were Jaffe's tennis sneakers, old but firm. My own shoes were too floppy and torn. That might be better, Ray. With sneakers, your feet are light and you can jump from boulder to boulder with no trouble. Of course, we'll swap shoes at certain times and make it. What about food? What are you bringing? Well, before I tell you about food, Ray, sometimes he called me by my first name, and always when he did so, it was a long, drawn-out, sad Ray, as though he was worried about my welfare. I've got your sleeping bag. It's not a duck down like my own, and naturally a lot heavier, but with clothes on and a good big fire, you'll be comfortable up there. Clothes on, yeah, but why a big fire? It's only October. Yeah, but it's below freezing up there, Ray, in October, he said sadly. At night? Yeah, at night, and in the daytime it's real warm and pleasant. You know, old John Muir used to go up to those mountains where we're going with nothing but his old army coat and a paper bag full of dried bread, and he slept in his coat and just soaked the old bread in water when he wanted to eat. And he roamed around like that for months before tramping back to the city. My goodness, he must have been tough. Now, as for food, I went down to Market Street to the Crystal Palace Market and bought my favorite dry cereal, bulgur, which is kind of a Bulgarian cracked rough wheat, and I'm going to stick pieces of bacon in it, little square chunks. That'll make a fine supper for all three of us, Morley and us. And I'm bringing tea. You always want a good cup of tea, a hot tea under those cold stars. And I'm bringing real chocolate pudding, not that instant phony stuff, but good chocolate pudding that I'll bring to a boil and stir over the fire, and then let it cool ice cold in the snow. Oh boy! So instead of rice this time, which I usually bring, I thought I'd make a nice delicacy for you, Ray, and in the bulgur, too, I'm going to throw in all kinds of dried diced vegetables I bought at the ski shop. We'll have our supper and breakfast out of this. And for energy food, this big bag of peanuts and raisins and another bag with dried apricot and dried prunes ought to fix us for the rest. And he showed me the very tiny bag in which all of this important food for 3 grown men for 24 hours or more climbing at high altitudes was stored. The main thing in going to mountains is to keep the weight as far down as possible. Those packs get heavy. But my God, there's not enough food in that little bag. Yes, there is. The water swallows it up. Do we bring wine? No, it isn't any good up there. And once you're at a high altitude and tired, you don't crave alcohol. I didn't believe this, but said nothing. We put my own things on the bike and walked across the campus to his place, pushing the bike along the edge of the sidewalk. It was a cool, clear Arabian night, dusk with the tower clock of University of Cal, a clean black shadow against the backdrop of cypress and eucalyptus and all kinds of trees, bells ringing somewhere, and the air crisp. It's going to be cold up there, said Jaffe. But he was feeling fine that night and laughed when I asked him about next Thursday with Princess. You know, we played Yab Yum twice more since that last night. She comes over to my shack any day or night, any time, and man, she won't take no for an answer. So I satisfy the Bodhisattva. And Jaffe wanted to talk about everything, his boyhood in Oregon. You know, my mother and father and sister were living in a real primitive life in that log cabin farm, and on cold winter mornings, we'd all undress and dress in front of the fire. We had to. That's why I'm not like you about undressing. I mean, I'm not bashful or anything like that. What'd you used to do around college? In the summers, I was always a government fire lookout. That's what you ought to do next summer, Smith. And in the winters, I did a lot of skiing and used to walk around the campus on crutches real proud. I climbed some pretty big mountains up there, including Long Haul up Rainier almost to the top where you sign your name. I finally made it one year. There are only a few names up there, you know. And I climbed all around the Cascades, off-season and in-season, and worked as a logger. Smith, I gotta tell you all about the romance of Northwest logging. Like you keep talking about railroading, you should have seen the little narrow gauge railways up there, and those cold winter mornings with snow and your belly full of pancakes and syrup and black coffee. Boy, you raise your double bitted axe to your morning's first log, and there's nothing like it. That's just like my dream of the great Northwest, the Quaiquitli Indians, the Northwest Mounted Police. Well, there in Canada, they got them. Over in British Columbia, I used to meet some on the trail. We pushed the bike down past the various college hangouts and cafeterias, and looked into Robbie's to see if we knew anybody. Alva was in there, working his part-time job as a busboy. Japhie and I were kind of outlandish looking on the campus in our old clothes. In fact, Japhie was considered an eccentric around the campus, which is the usual thing for campuses and college people to think whenever a real man appears on the scene. Colleges being nothing but grooming schools for the middle class, non-identity which usually finds its perfect expression on the outskirts of the campus in rows of well-to-do houses with lawns and television sets in each living room with everybody looking at the same thing and thinking the same thing at the same time while the Japhies of the world go prowling in the wilderness to hear the voice crying in the wilderness, to find the ecstasy of the stars, to find the dark, mysterious secret of the origin of faceless wonders, crapulous civilization. All these people, said JP, they all got white tile toilets and take big dirty craps like bears in the mountains, but it's all washed away to convenient supervised sewers, and nobody thinks of crap anymore or realizes that their origin is shit and civet and scum of the sea. They spend all day washing their hands with creamy soaps they secretly want to eat in the bathroom. He had a million ideas. He had them all. We got to this little shack as it grew dark and you could smell wood smoke and smoke of the leaves in there, and packed everything up neat and went down the street to meet Henry Morley, who had the car. Henry Morley was a bespectacled fellow and of great learning, but an eccentric himself, more eccentric and outre than Japhy on the campus. A librarian with few friends, but a mountain climber. His own little one-room cottage in a back lawn of Berkeley was filled with books and pictures of mountain climbing, and scattered all over the rucksacks, climbing boots, skis. I was amazed to hear him talk. He talked exactly like Reinhold Coates, the critic. It turned out they'd been friends long ago and climbed mountains together, and I couldn't tell whether Morley had influenced Coates or the other way around. I felt it was Morley who had done the influencing. He had the same snide, sarcastic, extremely witty, well-formulated speech with thousands of images like when Japhy and I walked in and there was a gathering of Morley's friends in there, a strange outlandish group, including one Chinese and one German from Germany, and several other students of some kind. Morley said, I'm bringing my air mattress. You guys can sleep on that hard, cold ground if you want, but I'm going to have a pneumatic aid. Besides, I went and spent $16 on it in the wilderness of Oakland Army Navy stores and drove around all day wondering if with roller skates or suction cups you can technically call yourself a vehicle, or some such to me incomprehensible, to everybody else secret meaning joke of his own, to which nobody listened much anyway. He kept talking and talking as though to himself, but I liked him right away. We sighed when we saw the huge amounts of junk he wanted to take on the climb, even canned goods, and besides his rubber air mattress, a whole lot of pickaxe and whatnot equipment we'd really never need. You can carry that axe, Morley, but I don't think we'll need it. But canned goods is just a lot of water you have to lug on your back. Don't you realize we got all the water we want waiting for us up there? Well, I just thought a can of this Chinese chop suey would be kind of tasty. I've got enough food for all of us. Let's go. Morley spent a long time talking and fishing around and getting together his unwieldy packboard, and finally we said goodbye to his friends and got into Morley's little English car and started off, about 10 o'clock, toward Tracy and up to Bridgeport, from where we would drive another 8 miles to the foot of the trail at the lake. I sat in the back seat, and they talked up front. Morley was an actual madman who would come and get me later, carrying a quart of eggnog, expecting me to drink that. But I'd make him drive me to the liquor store, and the whole idea was to go out and see some girl, and he'd have me come along to act as a pacifier of some sort. We came to her door. She opened it. When she saw who it was, she slammed the door, and we drove back to the cottage. Well, what was this? Well, it's a long story, Morley would say vaguely. I never quite understood what he was up to. Also, seeing Alva had no spring bed in the cottage. One day he appeared like a ghost in the doorway as we were innocently getting up and brewing coffee, and presented us with a huge double-bed spring that, after he left, we struggled to hide in the barn. And he'd bring odd assorted boards and whatnot, and impossible bookshelves, all kinds of things. And years later, I had further Three Stooges adventures with him, going out to his house in Contra Costa, which he owned and rented, and spending impossible to believe afternoons when he paid me $2 an hour for hauling out bucket after bucket of mudslime, which he himself was doling out a flooded cellar by hand. Black and mud-covered as Tartariloc, the king of the mudslimes of Paratiolequaxpan, with a secret grin of elfish delight on his face. And later, returning through some little town wanting ice cream cones, we walked down Main Street, had hiked on the highway with buckets and rakes, with ice cream cones in our hands, knocking into people on the little sidewalks, like a couple old-time Hollywood silent film comedians, whitewash and all. An extremely strange person. Anyway, in any case, any old way you looked at, and drove the car now out toward Tracy on the busy four-lane highway, and did most of the talking. At everything JP said, he had 12 to say, and it went like this. JP would say something like, by God, I feel really studious lately. I think I'll read some ornithology next week. Morley would say, who doesn't feel studious when he doesn't have a girl with a Bavaria suntan? Every time he said something, he would turn and look at JP and deliver these rather brilliant inanities with a complete deadpan. I couldn't understand what kind of strange secret scholarly linguistic clown he really was under these California skies. Or JP would mention sleeping bags, and Morley would ramble in with, I'm going to be the possessor of a pale blue French sleeping bag, lightweight, goose down, goodbye, I think, and find them in Vancouver. Good for Daisy May. Completely wrong type for Canada. Everyone wants to know if her grandfather was an explorer who met an Eskimo. I'm from the North Pole myself. What's he talking about? I'd ask from the back seat. And JP, he's just an interesting tape recorder. I told the boys I had a touch of thrombophlebitis, blood clots in the veins in my feet, and was afraid about tomorrow's climb. Not that it would hobble me, but would get worse when we came down. Morley said, is thrombophlebitis a peculiar rhythm for piss? Or I'd say something about Westerners, and he'd say, I'm a dumb Westerner. Look what preconceptions we have done to England. You're crazy, Morley. I don't know, maybe I am, but if I am, I'll leave a lovely will anyway. Then out of nowhere he would say, well, I'm very pleased to go climbing with two poets. I'm going to write a book myself. It'll be about Ragusa, a late medieval maritime city-state republic which solved the class problem, offered the secretaryship to Machiavelli, and for a generation had its language used as a diplomatic one for the Levant. This was because of a pool with the Turks, of course. Of course, we'd say. So he'd ask himself the question out loud. Can you secure Christmas with an approximation only 18 million seconds left of the original Old Red Chimney? Sure, says JV laughing. Sure, says Morley, wheeling the car around, increasing the curves. They're boarding reindeer greyhound specials for a preseason heart-to-heart happiness conference deep in Sierra Wilderness, 10,560 yards from a primitive motel. It's newer than analysis and deceptively simple. If you lost a round-trip ticket, you can become a gnome of the No, the outfits are cute, and there's a rumor that Actors' Equity conventions sop up the overflow bounced from the Legion. Either way, of course, Smith, turning to me in the back, and in finding your way back to the emotional wilderness, you're bound to get a present from someone. Will some maple syrup help you feel better? Sure, Henry. And that was Morley. Meanwhile, the car began climbing into the foothills somewhere, and we came to sundry Solon towns, where we stopped for gas, and nothing but blue jeaned Elvis Presleys on the road, waiting to beat somebody up. But down beyond them, the roar of fresh creeks and the feel of the high mountains not far away. A pure, sweet night, and finally we got out on a real narrow tar country road and headed up toward the mountains for sure. Tall pine trees began to appear at the side of the road, and occasional rock cliffs. The air felt nippy and grand. This also happened to be the opening eve of the hunting season, and in the bar where we stopped for a drink, there were many hunters in red caps and wool shirts looking silly getting loaded, with all their guns and shells in their cars, and eagerly asking us if we'd seen any deer or not. We had, certainly, seen a deer, just before we came to the bar. Morley had been driving and talking, saying, "Well, Ryder, maybe you'll be Alfred Lord Tennyson of our little tennis party here on the coast. They'll call you the new Bohemian and compare you to the Knights of the Round Table minus Amadis the Great and the extraordinary splendors of the little Moorish kingdom that was sold round to Ethiopia for 17,000 camels and 1,600 foot soldiers when Caesar was sucking on his mammy's teat." And suddenly, the deer was in the road, licking at our headlamps, petrified, before leaping into the shrubbery by the side of the road and disappearing into the sudden, vast, diamond silence of the forest, which we heard as Morley cut the motor, and just the scuffle of its hoofs running off to the haven of the raw fish Indian up there in the mists. It was real country we were in. Morley said about 3,000 feet now. We could hear creeks rushing coldly below on the cold starlit rocks without seeing them. "Hey, little dear," I'd yell to the animal. "Don't worry, we won't shoot you." Now in the bar, where we'd stopped at my insistence, in this kind of cold, northern up-mountain country, ain't nothing better for a man's soul at midnight but a good warm glass of warm and red port, heavy as the syrups of Sir Arthur. "Okay, Smith," said Jaffe, "but seems to me we shouldn't drink on a hiking trip." Who gives a damn? Okay, but look at all the money we've saved by buying cheap dried foods for this weekend, and all you're gonna do is drink it right down. That's the story of my life, rich or poor, and mostly poor and truly poor. We went in the bar, which was a roadhouse, all done up in the up-country mountain style, like a Swiss chalet, with moose heads and designs of deer on the booths, and people in the bar itself an advertisement for the hunting season, but all of them loaded, a weaving mass of shadows at the dim bar as we walked in and sat at 3 stools and ordered the port. The port was a strange request in the whiskey country of hunters, but the bartender roused it up in the odd bottle of Christian Brothers port and poured us 2 shots in wide wine glasses. Morley, a teetotaler actually, and Jaffe and I drank and felt it fine. Drank it fine. Said Jaffe, warming up to his wine in midnight. "Soon, I'm going back north to visit my childhood wetwoods and cloudy mountains and old bitter intellectual friends and old drunken logger friends. By God, Ray, you ain't lived till you've been up there with me, or without. And then I'm going to Japan and walk all over that hilly country, finding ancient little temples hidden and forgotten in the mountains, and old sages 109 years old praying to Kwannon in huts and meditating so much that when they come out of the meditation, they laugh at everything that moves. But that don't mean I don't love America. By God, though, I hate these damn hunters. All they want to do is level a gun at a helpless sentient being and murder it. For every sentient being or living creature these actual pricks kill, they will be reborn 1,000 times to suffer the horrors of samsara, and damn good for them too. Hear that, Morley? Henry, what you think?" My Buddhism is nothing but a mild, unhappy interest in some of the pictures they've drawn, though I must say sometimes Kekou strikes a nutty note of Buddhism in his mountain climbing poems, though I'm not much interested in the belief part of it. In fact, it didn't make a goddamn much of a difference to him. I'm neutral, said he, laughing happily with a kind of eager, slaking leer, and JP yelled, Neutral is what Buddhism is. Well, that port'll make you have to swear off yogurt. You know, I'm a fortiori disappointed because there's no Benedictine or Trappist wine. Only Christian Brothers, holy waters, and spirits around here. Not that I feel very expansive about being here in this curious bar anyway. It looks like the home plate for Ciardi and bread loaf writers, Armenian grocers, all of them well-meaning awkward Protestants who are on a group excursion for a binge and want to but don't understand how to insert the contraception. These people must be assholes, he added in a sudden straight revelation. The milk around here must be fine, but more cows than people. This must be a different race of Anglos up here. I don't particularly warm up to their appearance. The fast kids around here must go 34 miles. Well, JV, said he, concluding, if you ever get an official job, I hope you get a Brooks Brothers suit. Hope you don't wind up in an arts fartsy parties where it would say, as some girls walked in, young hunters, must be why the baby wards are open all year. But the hunters didn't like us to be huddled there, talking close and friendly in low voices about sundry personal topics, and joined us, and pretty soon it was a long, funny harangue up there, up and down the oval bar about deer in the locality, where to go climb, what to do, and when they heard we were out in this country not to kill animals but just to climb mountains, they took us to be hopeless eccentrics and left us alone. Jaffe and I had 2 wines and felt fine and went back in the car with Morley, and we drove away. Higher and higher, the trees taller, the air colder, climbing, till finally it was almost 2 o'clock in the morning, and they said we had a long way to go yet to Bridgeport and the foot of the trail, so we might as well sleep out in these woods in our sleeping bags and call it a day. We'll get up at dawn and take off. Meanwhile, we have this good brown bread and cheese too, said Jaffe, producing it. Brown bread and cheese he'd thrown in at the last minute in his little shack. And that'll make a fine breakfast, and we'll save the bulgur and goodies for our breakfast tomorrow morning at 10,000 feet. Fine. Still talking and all, Morley drove the car a little way over some hard pine needles under an immense spread of natural park trees, firs and ponderosas, 100 feet high, some of them, a great quiet starlit grove with a frost on the ground and dead silence except for occasional little ticks of sound on the thickets where maybe a rabbit stood petrified hearing us. I got out my sleeping bag and spread it out and took off my shoes, and just as I was sighing happily and slipping in my stockinged feet into my sleeping bag and looking around gladly at the beautiful tall trees, thinking, ah, what a night of true sweet sleep this will be. What meditations I can get in this intense silence of nowhere. Jaffe yelled at me from the car. Say it appears Mr. Morley has forgotten his sleeping bag. What? Well, now what? They discussed it a while, fiddling with flashlights in the frost, and then Jaffe came over and said, You'll have to crawl out of there, Smith. All we have is 2 sleeping bags now, and gotta zip 'em open and spread 'em out to form a blanket for the 3. God damn, that'll be cold. What? And the cold will slip in around the bottoms. Well, Henry can't sleep in the car. He'll freeze to death. There's no heater. But god damn it, I was all ready to enjoy this so much, I whined, getting out and putting on my shoes, and pretty soon Jaffe had fixed the 2 sleeping bags on top of ponchos and was already settled down to sleep, and on toss it was me had to sleep in the middle. I need to read that again. And it was, okay. I whined, getting out and putting on my shoes, and pretty soon Jaffe had fixed the 2 sleeping bags on top of ponchos and was already settled down to sleep. And on toss it was me had to sleep in the middle. Oh, and on toss it was me who had to sleep in the middle. And it was way below freezing by now, and the stars were icicles of mockery. I got in and lay down, and Morley, I could hear the maniac blowing up his ridiculous air mattress so he could lay beside me. But the moment he'd done so, he started at once to turn over and heave and sigh, and around the other side, and back toward me, and around the other side, all under the ice-cold stars and loveliness. While Jaffe snored, Jaffe wasn't subjected to all the mad wiggling. Finally, Morley couldn't sleep himself in that mad way of his, and I got a wink of sleep. But in a few minutes he was back, freezing, and got under the sleeping bag blanket, but started to turn and turn again, even curse once in a while, or sigh, and this went on for what seemed to be eternities, and the first thing I knew, Aurora was pale in the eastern hems of Amida, and pretty soon we'd be getting up anyway. That mad Morley. And this was only the beginning of the misadventures of that most remarkable man. As you'll see now, that remarkable man who was probably the only mountain climber in the history of the world who forgot to bring his sleeping bag. Jesus, I thought, why didn't he just forget his dreary air mattress instead?